Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Michele Van Gien explains why BTG was suddenly cancelled, or at least appeared to be. At first, the news hit fans like a thunderclap. The show had just begun to gain traction, sparking conversations on forums, podcasts, and late-night debates about its layered storytelling and ruthless character arcs. Yet, during Labor Week, a time when many shows faced predictable delays, BTG was struck harder. Its absence extended beyond what anyone expected, triggering a wave of speculation. Was the network pulling the plug on something too daring, too controversial, or was it just an unfortunate case of poor scheduling? The uncertainty created a storm of whispers that only amplified as Michele herself posted a cryptic status on her social media, one that seemed to suggest personal disappointment but left her followers scrambling for meaning. The misunderstanding was inevitable. In a world where fans dissect every line, emoji, and punctuation mark from their favorite showrunners, Michele's message was like gasoline poured over dry brush. Rumors spread with dizzying speed. Some claimed the crew had walked out, others believed the ratings were too low, and the most extreme voices suggested the storylines had crossed into territory the network no longer wished to endorse. What was missed by many was Michele's simple, human frustration at being unable to give her audience what she had promised on schedule. The delay was real, but the death sentence for the series was not. BTG, she clarified later, was very much alive. But survival came with a cost. Michele admitted openly that the gap between episodes would hurt the rhythm of the season. Unlike other productions that had the luxury of shooting months ahead and creating a cushion, BTG operated in near real time, weaving its twists into a schedule too tight to allow for fallback episodes. This vulnerability became both its weakness and its strange appeal. For fans, the wait became agonizing, but also strangely electric. Every day without BTG made the hunger sharper, the conversations louder, and the expectations higher. Michele promised that the storm of frustration would soon be answered with fire. Her words, "The tension you've carried with you these past weeks will explode on screen," were a lifeline to fans. The coming episodes, she teased, would not only justify the wait but burn deeper than anything the series had attempted before. And she revealed a long-term promise: the next year would bring more episodes, built to weather holidays and scheduling traps. For now, though, the immediate future belonged to chaos. The chaos, as the teaser hinted, centered on Allison. Her descent from troubled ex-lover to full-blown captor had already left viewers unsettled. But the kidnapping of Chelsea crossed a line. It was not only an attack on Chelsea as an individual but also on the partnership she shared with Kat. Their joint product, to launch a symbol of both their creative ambition and the healing of past wounds, was shattered in an instant. Fans had been rooting for that moment of triumph, only to watch it be torn apart by Allison's madness. Chelsea's suffering was painted in brutal strokes. Allison's demand was not simply to control her, but to bind her in the most twisted vow of permanence, marriage. The request, or rather, the demand, was laced with cruelty. Allison was not asking for love, she was demanding submission. The torment Chelsea endured in those hours became the raw heart of the upcoming arc. Not only physical pain, but psychological chains bound her tighter than any rope. The rescue mission promised hope but carried its own shadows. Kat, determined to save Chelsea at any cost, was not alone. Jacob and Madison joined her, forming a trio of desperation. Yet the teaser footage suggested failure before triumph. Sirens, flashing lights, a knife gleaming in a shaky hand, images blurred together to suggest that Allison's spiral would not end cleanly. A single mistake, one slip of the blade, could turn the rescue into tragedy. The fear was not only whether Chelsea would live but whether she would ever be whole again after escaping. The producers made it clear, Allison would not walk free. Her crimes would catch her in a net of consequences. But what punishment would look like, and whether justice could heal the scars she left, remained unspoken. The knife in her hand was not just a prop, it was a question mark carved into the future of Chelsea's character. Fans debated endlessly: would Chelsea's trauma become the new engine of her story, or would she reclaim her life with the strength to outshine Allison's shadow? While this chaos unfolded, another storm brewed in the Dupri family. If Allison embodied madness born of obsession, Then Leslie represented destruction fueled by entitlement. Her discovery of Barbara as her biological mother had catapulted her from outsider to inheritor overnight. With money came power, and with power came a hunger to wield it against those she despised. The Dupri family, already marked by grief and fractured bonds, became her target. Leslie's attacks were not subtle. She flaunted her wealth, mocked their struggles, and spread whispers that the family was cursed. For her, it wasn't enough to gain, others had to lose. Anita, haunted by Barbara's suicide and the words left behind in her final letter, carried guilt heavy enough to drown her. Though Anita had not pushed Barbara to the edge, the implication that her presence in the group had contributed to the pain was enough to keep her awake at night. Her decision to allow Leslie access to the inheritance was not simply generosity, it was penance. She believed, in some twisted sense, that she was paying for Barbara's silence and absence with every dollar handed to a woman who would use it as a weapon. Yet guilt could not blind Anita to the truth forever. Leslie's aggression grew bolder. What had begun as taunts transformed into orchestrated disruptions. Rumors of her bribing event organizers, sabotaging business deals, and feeding false stories to the press began to surface. Each act carried the same signature, a desire to tarnish the Dupri name. For Leslie, this was not just about revenge, it was about rewriting her own narrative. She would no longer be seen as the outsider, the unwanted child. She would be the storm that tore down the house of Dupri, brick by brick. Fans speculated that the coming collision between Leslie and the family would mirror Allison's chaos, though in a more insidious way. Allison used knives and confinement, while Leslie wielded contracts and headlines. Both, however, thrived on control, and both would force their victims to question the strength of their bonds. The brilliance of BTG lay in the parallel arcs. Chelsea's personal battle against Allison's madness was a microcosm of the larger family struggle against Leslie's campaign of destruction. Both threads asked the same question: how far can people be pushed before they break? And more importantly, when broken, can they be pieced together again, or do the cracks remain forever? Michele's promise that the explosions were coming was no empty statement. She had placed two ticking bombs at the center of her story, Allison with her knife, and Leslie with her inheritance. The only certainty was that when they went off, no one would emerge unchanged. The previews gave fans fragments, enough to ignite speculation but not enough to satisfy. A shot of Kat screaming in the rain, mud streaked across her face. A flicker of Chelsea's eyes wide with terror as Allison raised her hand. A brief glimpse of Anita clutching Barbara's letter, her hands trembling. And then Leslie, smirking at a gala, champagne in hand, as if the world had already bowed to her will. These moments stitched together a tapestry of dread and anticipation. Every character stood on a precipice. Kat risked everything to save Chelsea, but in doing so, she risked losing her own stability. Jacob and Madison were dragged into a nightmare they had not chosen, but one that would define their loyalties. Chelsea's future hung by a thread, caught between survival and the lingering chains of trauma. Anita faced the haunting choice of whether to confront Leslie directly or continue surrendering in guilt. And Leslie herself, with her newfound wealth, seemed unstoppable. Yet power has a way of painting targets on the backs of those who wield it carelessly. The brilliance of the writing was how it blurred the lines between villains and victims. Allison was monstrous, yes, but her obsession stemmed from wounds left untreated. Leslie was vicious, but her cruelty sprouted from rejection and years of being denied her place. Even Anita's choices were shaped by guilt she did not wholly deserve. BTG invited viewers not only to witness chaos but to question its roots. Was it madness, greed, trauma, or fate? And could any of these storms ever truly be calmed? The silence of the hiatus had made these questions louder. Fans dissected every clue, every frame, building theories that stretched across forums and into midnight conversations. Some believed Chelsea would not survive. Others predicted that Anita, pushed too far, would finally confront Leslie in a blaze of fury. Still others whispered that Barbara's ghost, not literal, but through her unseen influence, would haunt every choice made from here forward. Michele Van Gien had promised explosions. What the audience did not yet know was how wide the blast radius would be. and which characters would be left standing when the smoke cleared. The knife glimmered in Allison's hand like a promise of ruin. For Chelsea, each moment stretched into an eternity, each breath filled with the metallic taste of fear. The physical threat was undeniable, but the deeper torment was the emotional manipulation Allison had perfected. Her voice shifted between honeyed sweetness and razor-edged rage, one second begging Chelsea to say yes and the next hissing about betrayal. It was not merely captivity, it was psychological warfare, a demand for love twisted into a weapon. Kat, Jacob, and Madison moved like shadows through the night, desperate to find the location where Allison had hidden Chelsea. Kat's determination was a blazing torch, had made a silent vow never to lose Chelsea, not to madness, not to violence, not to the echoes of past relationships gone wrong. But determination could not protect them from mistakes. The path to Chelsea was littered with traps, both literal and emotional. Allison's obsession had driven her to anticipate every rescue attempt, as though she were scripting her own tragic play where Chelsea could only belong to her. When they finally confronted her, the collision was explosive. Allison's mask of fragile humanity cracked completely, revealing the raw fury beneath. Her shouts echoed off the walls, each syllable a jagged shard aimed not only at Chelsea but at Kat, whom she saw as the ultimate thief. Kat's presence turned the knife's threat sharper. For Allison, it was not enough to possess Chelsea, she had to erase the bond Chelsea had with Kat. The battle of wills unfolded as much in words as in action. Kat's pleas to Chelsea to hold on, to fight, to not give in to the darkness, clashed with Allison's venomous insistence that Chelsea belonged to her alone. The knife slashed through the air, narrowly missing flesh. The chaos escalated until sirens wailed in the distance, their approach signaling the end of Allison's reign. Yet even as the authorities closed in, the damage had been done. Chelsea's trembling hands, her eyes haunted by images only she could see, told the story of scars no rescue could erase. Allison was dragged away, screaming vows that Chelsea would never escape her shadow. The threat was neutralized, but the wound remained, pulsing like an unhealed cut. Chelsea's recovery was uncertain. She tried to speak of the ordeal, but her words faltered, as though Allison's voice still echoed in her ears. Kat stayed by her side, offering comfort, but even Kat's presence could not silence the doubt lingering in Chelsea's mind. Would she ever be free from Allison's grip, or had the trauma carved a permanent place inside her? Jacob and Madison, who had witnessed the confrontation, were shaken as well. They had expected fear, but what lingered was something deeper, a sense of how fragile safety truly was. While Chelsea struggled to rebuild herself, the Dupri family's troubles sharpened into a war. Leslie, flush with the wealth she had inherited, no longer limited herself to whispers and sabotage. She launched her assault in the open, attacking the family name with a boldness that stunned even those who knew her cruelty. Events hosted by the Dupris were suddenly plagued with disruptions, anonymous protests, mysteriously cancelled vendors, and scandals seeded in the press. Everywhere they turned, Leslie's shadow loomed. Anita bore the brunt of it. For years she had carried Barbara's ghost like a chain around her neck, believing herself to be the unintentional hand that had pushed her friend toward despair. Barbara's final note, vignette-cutting, had left her tormented with questions she could never answer. By granting Leslie the inheritance, Anita had hoped to quiet that guilt, to transform pain into redemption. Instead, she had armed her enemy. Now she watched helplessly as Leslie used the fortune not to honor her mother, but to desecrate the family Barbara had once loved. The tension within the Dupri home became unbearable. Whispers of whether Anita had made a mistake in acknowledging Leslie's claim to the inheritance turned into outright accusations. Some argued she had betrayed the family by empowering someone bent on their destruction. Anita herself did not disagree. Each night, as she reread Barbara's letter, she wondered if surrendering to Leslie's demands had been an act of cowardice rather than atonement. Leslie's campaign escalated to a spectacle when she announced her own event, an extravagant gala designed to overshadow anything the Dupris had planned. She invited celebrities, influencers, and powerful figures, using Barbara's legacy as the theme. To the outside world, it looked like a celebration of Barbara's memory. To those who knew the truth, it was a cruel mockery, Leslie parading as heir to a legacy she had no right to claim. The press coverage painted her as a bold, charismatic figure reclaiming her roots, while the Dupris were cast as bitter relics clinging to outdated power. The juxtaposition of Allison's downfall and Leslie's rise created a chilling symmetry. While one woman was dragged into the arms of justice, screaming and broken, another stood on the stage, triumphant and untouchable. The narrative suggested that evil did not vanish, it simply changed form. For Chelsea, the enemy had been obsession. The enemy was betrayal wrapped in blood ties. Kat, Jacob, and Madison found themselves entangled in both battles. Supporting Chelsea through her fragile recovery required patience and strength, but it also demanded that they face their own unresolved fears. Each had seen how quickly stability could shatter. Their involvement with the Dupris pulled them into another storm, one less immediate but equally devastating. Leslie's maneuvers threatened to dismantle not only Anita's reputation but the fragile connections that held everyone together. Anita, driven to the brink, began considering what she had once sworn she would never do: confront Leslie head-on. The idea terrified her. She had spent her life avoiding conflict, choosing guilt and silence over aggression. But watching Leslie desecrate Barbara's memory while tearing apart the family forced a fire into her veins. For the first time, Anita allowed herself to feel anger, no at Barbara, not at herself, but at the woman who used grief as a weapon. The confrontation, when it came, was not public but private. Anita cornered Leslie after the gala, away from cameras and applause. Her voice trembled at first, but the weight of decades gave her words power. She spoke of Barbara not as a figure to be exploited but as a human being, flawed, fragile, loved. She told Leslie that money could not erase the truth, that inheritance could not rewrite history. Leslie laughed, a cold sound, dismissing Anita's pain as weakness. But beneath the laughter, there was a flicker and unease she could not entirely mask. The battle lines were drawn more sharply than ever. Leslie, unwilling to give up her campaign, doubled down. Anita, though scarred by guilt, found a new strength in her refusal to let Barbara's legacy be weaponized. Chelsea, still healing, became a symbol of resilience, even as the knife's memory lingered. Kat, Jacob, and Madison, caught between these worlds, learned that survival was not only about escaping immediate danger but also about resisting the slow poison of betrayal. What lay ahead was uncertain. Would Chelsea find peace, or would Allison's shadow linger forever? Would Anita's newfound courage be enough to stand against Leslie's empire of spite? Could the Dupri family survive being torn apart from both outside attacks and internal guilt? The answers loomed on the horizon, heavy with promise and dread. The story pressed forward like a storm, building strength, each thread tightening toward an inevitable collision. Allison's crimes might have ended her freedom, but her impact on Chelsea's soul was far from over. Leslie's wealth might have bought her power, but it also painted her as a target for those who refused to let her win. And through it all, the question echoed: in a world where obsession and betrayal reign, who can truly claim victory? The days after the chaos settled into a deceptive calm, like the hush that follows a storm yet leaves the wreckage bare. Chelsea remained the quiet center of it all, her body healing but her mind still haunted. Kat refused to leave her side, knowing that recovery was not measured by stitches or bruises fading, but by whether Chelsea could one day look at her reflection without seeing Allison's shadow. Late at night, when Chelsea jolted awake from nightmares, Kat would hold her, whispering promises that Allison was gone. Yet both women understood that prison walls were not enough to cage the memory of what had been done. For Allison, incarceration was not an ending but a new stage. Her name lingered in headlines, a symbol of obsession turned monstrous. Journalists dissected her past, her motivations, her psychology, while true crime shows scrambled to feature her story. She had wanted Chelsea's devotion. Instead, she earned the world's morbid fascination. In interviews, Chelsea remained resolute, refusing to grant Allison the satisfaction of defining her. But there were moments, brief flickers, where fear still seized her, especially when she heard that Allison had filed appeals, claiming insanity, seeking loopholes to lessen her sentence. The system might contain Allison's body, but it could not erase her presence from Chelsea's mind. Meanwhile, The Dupri family's battlefield shifted from whispered sabotage to public spectacle. Leslie's campaign reached its zenith when she announced a memoir, one promising to reveal the truth about Barbara, Anita, and the legacy that had supposedly been stolen from her. The press devoured it, salivating at the scandal. Anita, however, refused to be blindsided again. This time she moved with intention, consulting allies, gathering her own records, and preparing to counter Leslie's narrative with facts and heart. The release of Leslie's memoir became the climax of the family saga. At the launch event, cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and Leslie basked in the glow of attention. She painted herself as the tragic child of a broken legacy, wielding her bitterness like a crown. But her triumph cracked when Anita appeared unannounced. Standing before the press, Anita read aloud sections of Barbara's original letters. Painful, raw, but true. She did not hide her guilt or her grief, she laid them bare for the world. Her vulnerability struck deeper than Leslie's bravado. For the first time, the narrative slipped from Leslie's control. The fallout was swift. Public opinion fractured. Some still clung to Leslie's performance, but many began to see her as opportunistic rather than heroic. Her wealth could buy events, books, and headlines, but it could not purchase authenticity. Anita's choice to confront the past, to expose her own wounds instead of burying them, became the act that shifted the tide. Leslie, furious, vowed revenge yet again, but the foundation beneath her began to crumble. Her empire, built on spectacle and inheritance, had no soul to sustain it. For the characters caught in between, the resolution was bittersweet. Jacob and Madison, once reluctant participants in the storm, emerged hardened but wiser. They had seen how obsession and greed could consume people, and they vowed never to let silence or avoidance fuel such destruction again. Kat and Chelsea, though scarred, found a fragile peace in each other's arms. Their relationship bore the marks of survival, not perfection, but that resilience became its strength. Chelsea learned that healing was not about forgetting Allison, it was about reclaiming her own narrative from her. The Dupri household, though fractured, began to knit itself together in new ways. Anita's act of defiance against Leslie became a rallying point, a reminder that Barbara's memory was not a weapon to be wielded but a legacy to be honored with honesty. For the first time in years, the family allowed themselves to speak openly about Barbara, not as a saint or a curse, but as a person they had loved and lost. That shift, though small, was revolutionary. The ending left no character untouched. Allison remained behind bars, her voice occasionally surfacing through appeals and media fascination, but her grip on Chelsea loosening with time. Leslie, though still wealthy, found her influence waning as the world grew weary of her theatrics. Anita carried scars of guilt but also the relief of finally confronting the truth. Kat, Jacob, and Madison bore their own burdens but had proven their loyalty in the fires of crisis. Chelsea, perhaps the most transformed, emerged not whole but stronger, learning that survival did not mean erasing pain but carrying it with dignity. The final scenes hinted at the future rather than offering perfect closure. A letter arrived for Chelsea, unsigned, its handwriting unfamiliar but its message chilling: "You'll never really be free." Whether it was Allison reaching out from prison or Leslie striking from the shadows remained unclear. The ambiguity was deliberate, a reminder that peace is never permanent, that ghosts of obsession and betrayal linger even when their sources are locked away. And yet, amid the uncertainty, there was light. Chelsea, holding the letter, did not grumble. She looked at Kat, at the family gathered around her, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself a small, defiant smile. Fear might remain, but so did strength. The gates that once trapped them in cycles of guilt, trauma, and vengeance had not vanished, but they no longer seemed unbreakable. The story closed not with triumph or tragedy alone, but with resilience. The characters had been tested, scarred, and reshaped. Some had fallen, others had risen, and all had changed. In the quiet after the storm, one truth lingered: beyond the gates of pain and betrayal lies not a perfect future, but the chance to keep moving forward, no matter how haunted the path may be.